Welcome back. Today, my partner Matt and I are going to present the findings of our research on coded language associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. Our research topic questioned if the coded language used in reference to the Black Lives Matter movement differed based upon opposing political affiliations. This topic is important to discuss and address in order for us to understand the perception of negative and positive code words correlated with the Black Lives Matter movement. Also, important to address if opposing political affiliations affect people's views on social issues. Throughout this presentation, we'll be discussing more on code language. So briefly, code language refers to words that are directed at a particular group of people or concept that the context of their usage is ultimately absorbed into the meaning of the word.
And the theory we used was the framing theory. And what that theory suggests is that how something is presented to the audience influences the choices people make about how to process the information. For example, individuals can perceive information differently from others based on how their political platforms frame certain information. As for our methodology, we consisted of 125 respondents, which had 25 conservatives, 43 moderates, and 57 liberals, all age ranging from 18 and above. So the procedures we took was snowballing and convenience sampling. We used a Likert type survey and Google Forms. As for our data analysis, we used a ANOVA test, which gave us two themes: negative code language and positive code language.
Now we'll discuss the results of our research. The first thing we'll talk about and discuss is negatively coded language that's associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. For instance, a couple of the negatively coded language that we use in this theme were thugs and killers. There was a significant difference between political affiliations and a perception of negative code language used to affiliate with the Black Lives Matter movement. To elaborate, our research suggested that conservatives tend to have a more positive perception of negatively coded language to associate with the Black Lives Matter movement. As researchers, this data helps us accept the first hypothesis and further research to determine why conservatives tend to have a positive perception of negatively coded language that's associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. The results of the final theme that we'll discuss is positively coded language that's associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. Example of positively coded language used in this theme were activists and advocates. There were no significant difference between political affiliations and their perception of positively coded language associated with the Black Lives Matter movement, but the second hypothesis can be partially supported. Our test indicated the mean score for liberals were significantly different than conservatives. Therefore, liberals generally accepted more positive coded language than conservatives. With our data partially supporting the second hypothesis, we can further understand why liberals tend to have a positive perception of positive coded language associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. This research builds on existing evidence of conservatives and Republicans being more likely to oppose the Black Lives Matter movement. According to the Justice Quarterly, which researched analyses of Black Lives Matter media portrayals, where the Republican candidate at the time, Mitt Romney, received a greater percentage of votes in 2012, were more likely to oppose the Black Lives Matter movement. While previous research has focused on the opposing political affiliation, views on the Black Lives Matter movement, these results demonstrated opposing political affiliations' views on specific code language that's associated with the Black Lives Matter movement.
As for our limitations, we were only able to receive 125 participants, and we believe more participants will allow us to develop a better conclusion. Improper representation of target population, the target audience was different political affiliations, but we received a very low response rate from conservatives compared to our other affiliations. And code words, we did not include definitions on certain code words such as Marxist and revolutionist. Some participants were unaware of what these certain words meant. As for our future research, We need to understand why conservatives they view the Black Lives Matter movement negatively. We must understand where they're getting their information from, and we also believe if we were to ask more open-ended questions to understand why the participants feel how they feel towards the movement or certain words.
So we would like to leave you with this: justice for Breonna Taylor, Dante Wright, and countless others that are killed by police. Say their names. Black Lives Matter.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lane Williams, and this is my partner, Clint Huffman, and our topic was on online learning and a new norm for the education world. So as our title suggests, due to COVID-19, as you all know, a lot of online learning has moved to Zoom, the online platform where you can stream classes and share screens and all kinds of cool features. So this subject is particularly interesting for academic research because of its prevalence and the times that we're in. And since the outbreak, Zoom has taken precedence over a lot of in-person classroom learning in order to maintain student and faculty safety. And a little bit off of that, our research gap, we aim to find how teachers have adapted to this online learning environment, and we'll get into that a little later. And our research question was, how does online learning affect students' classroom performance compared to in-person learning from a teacher's perspective? So our methodology with our participants, all participants were teachers from a rural East Coast school system. They all taught and resided in Virginia, but throughout various school systems in Virginia. So we recruited through email, which volunteer and snowball sampling with the emails, and we primarily interviewed high school and middle school teachers. And all participants were high school and middle school teachers, and all information was kept on confidential, password-protected laptops between Clint and I. So our procedures, we did all of our interviews over Zoom. We had 8 interviews total, and they all lasted an average altogether 20 minutes each, maybe a few a little bit shorter. And as I said, the data was transcribed with traditional recorders and password-protected laptops between us. And for data analysis, our themes developed using repetition, especially with the motivation of students, which we'll get into, and keywords such as convenient, self-motivation, and willing to learn. And our big focus was on the teacher-student dynamic in the space of the online learning world.
During our research, we found 3 significant results and themes. The first theme was the case for online learning. We found that teachers disliked Zoom just as much as students. Example of this, teachers felt that online learning is not as beneficial as an in-person classroom environment. We had several participants claim that participation and just outright attendance just went down after classes went online. So this helps teachers and students adjust to future circumstances that may require a virtual learning approach in the future. Our second theme, Zoom fatigue, which is, of course, if you haven't heard of it, that occurs when students are exposed to the computer screen for too long and they get burnt out and exhausted. We actually gave each participant like our own definition before we asked them questions about Zoom fatigue just to make sure that they knew what it was. Zoom is a useful tool to implement into the classroom but should not be used as a primary way of teaching students. And this is what we found through our research from multiple participants. Evidence on Zoom fatigue helps teachers adjust their teaching strategies for the future, just like in the first theme. Our third theme, this was an interesting one. Like I said, participation went way down. K through 12 teachers could not require their students to turn their cameras on while on Zoom. So the teachers they couldn't tell whether their students were actually paying attention or they were watching Netflix in the background. So because of this, students did not feel obligated to pay attention in class.
So for our discussion, I'm going to kick it over to Clint. That's my fault. I interrupted him, so go ahead.
So overall, we found that teachers feel that Zoom has worsened their students' classroom performance, more specifically, class participation and attendance. The results of this research can be used in the future to improve the virtual learning experiences of students in order to raise class participation levels. While Zoom has been convenient for both teachers and students, the negatives definitely outweigh the positives in this case, even though there are benefits to learning in an online environment.
So for our limitations, I'm sure as many people listed on their limitations, due to IRB late certification, we were only able to get 8 interviews total, and we didn't get as many as we planned. Another limitation is, as I said earlier, we stayed in Virginia, so it could be possible to expand to different regions, talk to other teachers, and see how they manage this phenomenon differently. And also, not a big one, but our interviews were all over Zoom, so it could have been a factor to, if the interviews were in person, it could have flowed a little bit better, possibly. And for future research, if we were to redo this, we would like to flip it around and possibly gain the student's perspective. A lot of the teachers alluded to students' perspective. As Clint said, participation dropped a lot. So if we did this again, maybe we could get their perspective as well. And also ask teachers of all grade levels. So we only focused on high school and middle school teachers. So maybe it's possible to get college professors in that as well. And overall, like Clint alluded to, that participation is way down within the online learning world, and that's what we would do different if we were to do it again. And that'll do it. So thank you for your time and listening today.
is Claire Baugh,
And I'm Mark Peeters.
and today we will be talking about our research project on the significance of TikTok among college students. So, with our research question being how significant is TikTok among college students, we wanted to study a couple different areas. One being how college students were utilizing TikTok, the next being how significant TikTok is in their daily lives, and lastly, any potential impact on their mental health and or academic performance. Sorry.
So we conducted 12 interviews total. They were all done on Zoom, roughly around 30 minutes in length. All of our participants were Longwood college students, male, female, ranging from the ages of about 18 to 23. They were all gathered via a Google poll, and their confidentiality was maintained throughout the course of the interviews and the data collection process. Once the interviews were done, we wanted to analyze certain thematic elements that we found, and those were determined via certain keywords, phrases, or repetition of topics and ideas that came across during the interviews themselves.
So our first theme is about how social media was being used in general, and then if the COVID-19 pandemic had any effect on that. And what we found is that the COVID-19 pandemic increased social media usage for a variety of reasons. As stated by participant number 2, we found that social media such as TikTok was used as a distraction. Social media was also used to inform themselves on the ongoing pandemic, and it was also used to stay connected with friends and family that they could no longer see due to quarantine and social distancing guidelines. We found this relevant to our topic because, as stated by participant number 2, TikTok did hold significance during the pandemic by keeping college students occupied and distracted. Our next theme is how TikTok was being utilized by our participants. And our participants utilized TikTok for a variety of reasons, but what we found made it more popular and appealing by other apps can be summarized by participant number 8, who talked about how the videos were short and it was easy to intake information, especially for people with short attention spans. We found this significant to our study because even though it is a very popular app that a lot of college students are using, we found that our participants seem to be able to not let it consume much of their day-to-day lives. And lastly, our third theme was the impact of TikTok on academic performance. As stated by participant number 4, TikTok is a very convenient way to procrastinate. However, due to their demographic and maturity level, our participants' academics were not affected, but our participants did seem aware of any potential negative consequences by giving into procrastination.
So after our results were collected, we then wanted to analyze them against research that we had done previously. So for our first thematic element, talking about social media and the COVID-19 pandemic, we had originally aligned ourselves with the idea of Vargas's study in 2019, talking mainly about the idea of FOMO, or fear of missing out. And this was the opposite of what we found, because as our participants had discussed, they saw usage of social media rise during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that was basically null and void. For the second theme, talking about the utilization of TikTok, our participants actually fell into the lowest range category of the 23.6% from the Figueres, Ma, Grandino, Perez, and Malta study of 2021, which basically discussed students' uses of social media apps in about hours per day. And our participants were in the lowest category, 1 to 3 hours per day. And this is the exact opposite of what we had originally thought. And then talking about the third theme with the impact on academics, we had also agreed with the concept that was in the Hisayo, Shu, and Han study of 2017, talking about the impacts of technostress, which is just overindulgence of social media or technology that could affect or negatively impact academics. And this was the opposite of what we found, because our participants were able to successfully juggle social media usage and their time on the workload. And then in terms of limitations, just roadblocks that we hit along the way, Zoom interviews were a big one for us because we weren't able to really notice any key facial expressions or any body language that our participants used. And that was a big downer for us. In terms of wording of certain questions, that was another one for us. Some of the questions caused confusion with our participants, and they ended up giving answers to questions that they weren't really confident with. And then knowledge of TikTok. Some of our participants, they didn't even have TikTok, and they felt as though they weren't giving the answers that we thought that they had needed, and that kind of stifled some of the research that we found.
And lastly, for future research, we suggest the possibility of looking into other social media apps such as Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, etc. These are more essential apps that have been around for a little bit longer than TikTok. TikTok is more of a newer app. Secondly, we would suggest possibly quantitative research using polls and surveys so participants' identity would remain even more anonymous because they are just a number, and we would be able to get more results. And lastly, we would recommend in-person interviews for the ability to use body language and facial expression for data, and also the possibility of focus groups, because that was something we did not do. We chose to do individual interviews instead. And that is all we have for our presentation today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Thank you very much.
everyone. My name is Sarah Allman.
And I'm Cade Jameson.
The topic that we have chosen to research is how individuals use social media to maintain and improve their mental health. And we believe that this topic is one that is not researched nearly enough. A number of previous studies focus on how social media causes mental health to decline. However, the current study strived to find out how much it depends on how participants interact on social media. The purpose of this study was to evaluate a relationship that might exist between social media usage, sense of virtual community, and sense of support system. We hope to find main reasons people use social media to express their mental health issues and how they build a community with others on this platform. In order to examine the relationship, we will be quantitatively measuring individuals ranging from the 19 to 28 age range through surveys. If these individuals are surveyed about their social media usage, then it will be known that more frequent social media usage will have a stronger sense of virtual community and support system. We hope to find main reasons people use social media to express their mental health issues and how they build a community with others on this platform. Our first hypothesis is that more individuals perceive a sense of virtual community, the more they will perceive and receive online social support. The social information processes theory provides an explanation as to how interpersonal communication is possible online. Despite the lack of nonverbal cues, the theory introduces that interpersonal communication can be achieved online through the rate of communication and the impression of messages. This is vital for the current study because it allows the researchers to understand what would be measured in order to obtain relevant results. These measurements include the rate of communication and the impression of messages. The main intended audience for the study is the 19 to 28 age group. However, any participant was encouraged to complete the study. All participants were introduced to the current study through direct messaging, promotional messaging, text messaging, and word of mouth. Most participants were college students due to the convenience given to the researchers who are also college students. All information received was kept confidential throughout the research process. A Likert type scale was used to conduct the survey. A Likert scale allowed the researchers to get a holistic view of people's opinions and their level of agreement. 100 participants completed the survey. Before the participant took the survey, they needed to agree to a consent question, or else their response would not be included in the data gathered and analyzed. The survey consisted of 5 questions about virtual community, 5 questions about social support, and 2 demographic questions. The data was formed through using Google Forms and Microsoft Excel. The results developed through the Pearson's correlation indicated that there is a modest positive relationship between social media and sense of social support, and social media sense of virtual community.
Overall, research did indicate that there was a positive correlation between sense of virtual community and sense of social support online. The biggest surprise was that virtual community was that participants did not feel a sense of companionship when they interacted with others on social media. However, a majority of them did have intentions of truly improving and knowing more about how they can grow closer to positive mental health on social media. They tended to feel that others often interacted with them, usually using mostly direct messages, comments, and likes on posts. For a sense of social support, participants felt that their questions concerning mental health were not answered. They also felt that their self-esteem is not encouraged or built up on social media while interacting. However, a majority of participants revealed that they can truly trust others to give positive responses to their posts when they need it the most. After results were concluded, we found that a massive 85% of participants that use social media several times a day daily. Due to this overlap that prevented possible accurate measurements, we then developed a new hypothesis previously defined by my research partner. Based on this hypothesis, results indicated that our proposal did indeed was supported, as we found users did have intentions of improving and finding more things about positive mental health and how to achieve it. Results showed that users fulfilled this when interacting with others by mostly talking about common interests, common similarities, as well as struggles that they have experienced themselves. Results also indicated that our hypothesis was supported through users feeling like they could truly trust others to uplift them when they need it. Despite this, users may not be getting the information that they need most to benefit their own mental health from mental health professionals. During the research process, some limitations did occur, such as the convenience of getting college students to complete our survey, which was a part of our target audience. But this does mean that a large majority of participants were shown to be within the younger range of the target audience and not as expanded as we would have liked. Another limitation was a lack of balance shown in the social support section, where there was 4 questions talking about positive mental health and 1 question put in there talking about examining negative mental health. In conclusion, our current study indicates that the more individuals perceive a sense of virtual community, the more they will perceive a sense of online social support. Some future research recommendations include Different types of evaluations should also be implicated through qualitative study that provides more specific findings to why participants may feel that they do not gain answers to their questions and why they are not encouraged while interacting with others on social media. Lastly, our current study focused solely on 3 of the top social media platforms, and we also provided that a wider range of platform observation may be most beneficial to more accurate findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
everyone, and thank you for joining in on our senior research, which is video games and the socialization of college student identities. I am Charlsye Tolson.
And I am Austin Eshmont.
So, for our research, you're probably wondering, what is it? It is a study on how video games had a control on each of our participants on the days when they are playing video games versus the days they are not. So, in this, we had to get IRB approval to make sure we got the consent of our participants, to make sure that we are not discouraging anyone or harming anyone's feelings during this. And then we also had a time span of which we had to get our participants together and to see if they can actually participate in this interview. Our research question: what kind of impact does frequent video game usage have on socialization of college students' identities? So for our methodology, for the participants, every participant went to a public university in Virginia. Participants are our peers and actively play video games. They also are in the graduating years of 2021, 2022, and 2023. The procedures that were taking place on our interviews that we conducted is 12 in total. They all lasted 20 to 30 minutes, and we both transcribed our data with a data transcribing app. The thematic analysis that we noticed were from a range of repetition of words, keywords such as communication, video games, media, disassociation, and of course video games. So, for our results, video games are used as a distraction. Of course, we all knew that. Participants using video games said that they escape from their responsibilities and their reality selves. So, this is from doing chores. You could do chores instead of playing video games, but they chose to play video games to distract themselves from doing chores. We also had that video games are disassociation. So we described disassociation to our participants as a feeling where a person's identity fades into the background as they disconnect from society. This example is they want to explore a new world that isn't the reality that they're in. So they lose track of their own.
And as we move on with our results, I would like to discuss the emotional power that video games have on each participant. A large majority of our participants felt emotionally altered after playing video games. Each video game has a certain effect on a person. If they're violent, they may feel more frustrated, they may feel more angry. If they're happy, they may feel more relaxed, they may feel more calm. And each effect and each difference is totally different from each participant. Also, additionally, gamers are competitive. If they win, they may feel more happy. If they lose, they may feel more frustrated. Moving on with our results, every participant but 2 of them said that they feel like they're in another world when playing video games. Video games are a place where individuals can escape. They can distract themselves for a second, and many people do admit that they like playing video games because they disassociate. Moving on with our discussion, there were several key concepts that we found as we collected our data. The amount of time playing video games does not affect the outcomes of our results. Emotions varied during days where gamers played video games versus days that gamers did not play video games. And video games had an effect on each individual's mind, whether it was to dissociate, whether it was to distract themselves, whether it was to emotionally alter what they're feeling at that current moment. There were many limitations in our study as well. We wanted to keep many constants in our study, but we were not able to do that with certain aspects. There was a variety of video games. There's a multitude of gaming systems such as Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, and each different type of video game has a different effect. Socialization, people played them individually, people played them online, people played them with another person in the same room. And all of these factors were limitations that we came across because we were not able to narrow down our focus on this study. There were many observations that we were not able to make as well because we were not in the same room watching these participants play these video games. We analyzed based on what they were saying. And future research. So as people take our research and continue on with it in the future, Xbox, PlayStation, each gaming system, you should focus on one of them in the future. Neglect phone games to be classified as video games at all. Many of our interviewers said that they liked playing phone games, and those were not classified as video games, and we should have made that more specific. Dissociation. In the future, we want to know what other types of activities do individuals use to dissociate. What other types of activities do students feel like using when they want to escape from their realities? And additionally, many of our participants used video games as coping mechanisms. They did not want to deal with what was going on in their lives, so they coped by playing video games to distract themselves, to disassociate. And we want to know in the future what hobbies or activities are used to cope. And does wanting a distraction and wanting to cope have a connection with our participants? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today with COM 460 Senior Research Projects. My name is Malik Robinson.
My name is Brandon Bowen.
And today we're going to talk to you about the importance of a college degree and how some cultures, when looking at it, or maybe even like racial backgrounds, view it as a higher standard or have a higher value of the college degree. College degree importance. Is college for everyone? Why is it important to some and not to others? Some of the themes that we found while conducting our research is pressure, judgment, sports, and also culture. A research gap that we found when doing our research, we only had 3 out of 12 participants that were actually female, and past studies also have lacked with female participants as well. So moving forward in any research, we would also need to include more females just so that we can get a more accurate depiction of the research questions and things that we're trying to figure out. We've included both of our research questions that we composed. Research question 1 being, what are some of the reasons that college degrees are held to a higher standard and are of more importance in some cultures rather than others? 2 being, what is the difference of the value of a college degree in multiple cultures? The first one more so focusing on the reasons, and the second one more so focusing on the differences in the values that it upholds. Going through the methodology. Participants were chosen to represent a larger community. Each participant had a different cultural background ranging from slightly to very different. We hand selected these participants just to make sure that we could gather as much information as possible from a broader group as well. Procedures. We went through IRB certification just to make sure that we didn't discourage anybody or harm anybody in the process of our research when asking the questions. We also had 12 individual interviews. They lasted roughly about 9 minutes, and the data was recorded and also transcribed so that way we can then break it down into our data analysis a lot easier. The thematic analysis. Some of the themes that we found were pressure with no judgment. When asked a question about pressure and an individual one about judgment. When asked about the first time they heard of college, a lot of students heard about college maybe around the 3rd or 4th grade or also in middle school. It wasn't directed at them, but it was more so talked around them, maybe in a school play during the middle portion or even at home when overhearing it from an older sibling. The last being a specific pauses around certain questions when students or participants were asked about pressure or judgment. A lot of them had to pause and had to think about it, so we just wanted to also note that as well. Results. Correlation of pressure and judgment. Participants, when asked the question if they felt pressure from any outside or outwards presence, participants felt pressure but no judgment necessarily. Participant 1 stated that college was something I ultimately wanted to do, but there was some pressure from society and family. This same participant also stated when asked the question about judgment, when I made my choice in college, my friends and family didn't judge me. Relevance being students choosing to ignore the outside pressure and to do what aligns best with their interests and their future careers. Something while conducting this, we found that the career choice in the future was very important to the students.
Another theme that we found was sports in relation to pressures. So one of the participants mentioned that pressures for school, but for sports specifically. He stated, "I had the freedom to choose my school as long as they offered me a sports scholarship. In relevance to the study, the pressures to go to school are present and the importance of the degree is not. It's more so the importance of going to school."
Some more results. Participants' feeling of autonomy. Feelings of pressure were present, but the participants still chose what's best for them and what works for them. For example, participant 2 stated, "I definitely wanted to do what makes me happy and not what they wanted me to do," referring to their family and the outwards pressure. "They trusted me to make the decision on college or not for myself." And this was also concurrent through all of our participants that participated. The relevance being, there is typically no judgment for our participants, but the overall, they choose what works best for them. Also going back to our research question, that the culture or the racial background didn't really have any effect on whether they chose to go to college or not.
Our final theme being demographics and location. Based on their location, they mentioned different pressures. One participant stated, "I felt free of judgment because no one from around here really goes to school." This is relevant to our study because it builds a foundation for future research and a study around degree importance based on geographical location. So let's talk about it. While we may not have found any groundbreaking research, we did create a firm foundation for future research, as well as reinforce pre-existing findings around cultural importance of a college degree. Some of our limitations. 6 of our 12 participants asked to not be recorded. We found this as a limitation because I had to ask them to slow down during their interviews, so I was making sure that I was getting accurate information, and slowing down the interview could hinder the answers that they give me. A lack of female presence. We already hit on this once, but I'm going to reinstate it as a limitation. We only had 3 of 12 that were female in our participation. We also had as a limitation that interviews were conducted only via phone. We found this as a limitation due to not being able to see facial expressions or body language. Moving into our future research. For future research, we said that we would like to take 3 different routes. One being sports in college. Scouts add pressure when you play sports, and that gives a pressure to go to school based on scholarship and merit. Choosing schools based off of scholarship solely can also be a route to go during future research relevant to sports in college. College degrees in relation to future careers. We found that some participants chose to just go straight into career or take a college degree to find their career. We feel like diving in deeper into career paths in relation to college degrees or not. Our final future research route is geographic location. We found that research in an important aspect of finding a degree based on location and various pressures around it. We also found that, for example, low-income areas may have less pressure to go to college. We thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hey, how y'all doing out there? My name is Anthony Jackson.
And I'm Corey Hugenberg, and our research topic is on Virginia versus the film industry. So Virginia is not known as a mecca of the film industry when you compare it to other places like Los Angeles, New York City, or Atlanta. The goal of our research project is to find out how the Virginia film industry compares to those other cities. Are the opportunities the same? Will you learn more in one place than another? So we developed 2 research questions to find out during our study. First one is Virginia a sufficient place to work in the filmmaking industry, or should you move? And the second one is, what is the best way for someone to build their knowledge in the film industry? Moving on to the methodology. We had conducted 12 interviews overall, and all participants were found via social media, mainly Instagram, and so the rest were found via mutual connections between other interviewees. All the interviewees we had currently played a part in the film industry or are pursuing a career in the film industry. And like I said before, we conducted 12 interviews, 4 in person, 8 interviews over the phone. All participants were asked the same questions, and the interviews averaged about 11 to 12 minutes. Our data came out to be a systematic analysis, and then to develop our themes, we looked for repetition, keywords, forcefulness, and importance.
So, for our results, we got a whole lot of, well, it depends. Because with the kind of the territory of this being more of a lifestyle kind of choice-oriented topic, it really became based on, well, how do you feel and who you are. So if you want to be in the film industry and it's your dream to do that, well, there's no correct way. For example, a person who's more introverted may find it necessary for them to stay here and stay where it's familiar. But somebody's more extroverted, well, they might be more able to go out and network with a lot of different people out there. And that may be what changes their entire mindset. So, though we had so many answers of, well, it depends and it just depends on your personality, we did get a lot of overlap. We found 4 themes: to stay or not to stay, hope in Virginia, filming laws, and then in front of the camera cast or behind the camera crew. So first, to start off, to stay or not to stay. Those that leave say, well, you should probably leave right now, while you're still young, while you're still fresh out of college, while you're still able to risk, while your parents are still willing to, cover you. Because now, most college students don't have the foundation or the stake in where they live. They just live there because that's where their parents live. So they say leave now. On the flip side of that coin, those that stay say gather experience and garner those relationships here, and then maybe think about moving out there. Because here, it's a more niche audience, or not audience, more of a niche industry. You get to have more lateral moves and more upwards mobility. Our second theme, the filmmakers who work in Virginia, is hope. The filmmakers who work in Virginia say that there is hope. Say that you can move more, there's more flexibility, and as I said before, it's a niche industry. But for our aspiring filmmakers, they say no, there isn't hope for the Virginia filmmakers. However, they do say in a few years it may change.
Then for our third theme, we looked at filming laws. Different cities have different filming laws, and some can result in your production getting shut down and you could obtain a fine. For example, if you're in Los Angeles and you get caught filming and you don't have a filming permit, your production could get shut down. You could get charged for a misdemeanor and fines. And then this can affect how much you learn in this city depending on the laws. So if in Virginia the laws are less strict than LA, depending on the county you're in, you'd be able to learn more here. Then our last theme we found was the difference between those who wanted to work in front of the camera versus behind the camera. From the data of the aspiring filmmakers, all those who want to work in front of the camera want to move out of the state as soon as possible. This is because they believe there aren't as many opportunities in Virginia in front of the camera compared to the other states. And then there's those behind the camera, and they say they want to stay in Virginia just because the market isn't as flooded with filmmakers and there's more opportunity. And this also goes hand in hand with the filming laws because they have more freedom.
So, to begin our discussion, I would like to remind us of our research question. Is Virginia a sufficient place to work in the filming industry, or should you move? Our second research question was, what is the best way for someone to build their knowledge of the film industry? We found that Virginia is a sufficient place to work in the film industry. We've had plenty of high-profile productions like Lincoln, Wonder Woman 84, and The Walking Dead World Beyond. So yes, it does have plenty of potential to grow. However, it does not succeed in giving hope. For our second research question, we found that yes, Virginia is also sufficient in building knowledge if you decide to stay here and be very direct in how you do everything that you do, if you decide to make lateral moves and stuff like that. And finally, it all comes down to the lifestyle and goal. If you want to be in front of the camera, like they said, you should probably move. If you want to be behind, then you should probably stay. And garner every experience that you can and get very targeted experiences.
So we had 3 different limitations when working on this project. One of the biggest one we found was not being able to get in contact with any people who used to live in Virginia and now work outside in other places like LA, New York City, or Atlanta. The second biggest one we had was getting more professionals who actually are in Virginia now. We emailed over 30 professionals and we only got responses from 3, and those are the ones we have. And our last one was generalizing the 2 parts of the film industry. We separated them by working in front of the camera and behind the camera, and there's many subcategories between those 2.
And so for future research, we suggest that you first obtain some outsiders, obtain the people that left Virginia and who stayed here for most of their lives and then left, and also get in the people that are still here. That's the first for future research. Second is by city. Filmmakers in Richmond may have a different experience from filmmakers in Northern Virginia or in Farmville. And then do one specific by position. A writer-director may feel differently from any other kind of position. So lastly, Corey and I would like to thank you for taking the time and listening to us discuss our research. Again, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison Turner, and beside me is my research partner, Kim Heiby. We conducted research titled Staying Focused, the Effects of Phone Attachment in College Students.
This is a research study on how phone usage impacts a college student's ability to be productive and excel academically. This is important because college students are on their phone now more than ever. This likely has a negative effect on their ability to learn and retain information. With this research, we hope to encourage students to spend less time on their phones and more time doing their work and being productive. We saw a gap in our research, or previous research, which is, why is phone attachment and addiction so prevalent in college students when they have large amounts of schoolwork and multiple commitments? The research question that guided our study is, how does the student's attachment to their phone impact their productivity and academic performance? We took 12 undergraduate participants from a small liberal arts university between the ages of 18 to 22 to participate in the study. They were recruited using Google Forms that were distributed on social media. All transcriptions and audio recordings were kept in Google Docs and on our Google Drives and will be deleted at the conclusion of our research study. We recorded 12 Zoom interviews, averaging about 11 minutes. We then used Timmy to transcribe all recordings. We looked at our research using a thematic analysis and developed themes using repetition, keywords, and forcefulness.
While conducting our thematic analysis, we found 3 themes to help answer our research question. The first is titled Distract and Delay, which shows how participants are easily distracted by their phones while doing work or studying. An example of this is that our participants said that they will attempt to take short breaks in between assignments, usually around 5 to 10 minutes, but they end up being much longer, being upwards of 30 minutes to even the rest of the day if they are not careful. A quote from a participant says, "I'll tell myself I'm going to take a 5-minute break, but it turns into a 30-minute break, or I'll sit on my phone for hours instead of doing what I need to do." This proved to us that once their concentration is broken, their productivity level is decreased and it makes it much harder to return to the task at hand. Our second theme is titled Phone on the Brain, which shows that participants are constantly thinking about their phones and who may be contacting them, especially when they are not actively using their phones. An example of this is that when our participants are not on their phones, they experience FOMO, which is the fear of missing out on plans, information, or potential emergency situations. A quote from a participant says, "I feel like I'm missing out on something. I'm not quite sure what I would be missing out on, but I feel like I'm missing out on something." This proved to us that our participants were more focused on their phones instead of their work, which made getting things done more challenging and time-consuming. Through these 2 themes, we found that phone attachment does in fact have a negative impact on productivity. The more time that our participants spent on their phone, the less time they spent paying attention in class or to their work. Our third and final theme is titled Academic Aid, which shows that participants use their phones for school-related activities, communication, and work. An example of this is that our participants may use Quizlet to study for exams, Outlook to communicate with peers and professors, and even Safari to look up answers to homework. A quote from a participant said, "With homework and stuff like that, I tend to look up help, whereas I should use my textbook and look it up that way." This proved that phones do make it easier for our participants to study for exams and communicate with others. We also found that our participants feel that phone attachment does not have a negative impact on their academics because they view their phone as a resource and they genuinely care about their studies.
The research continues to confirm the negative impact of phone attachment. After graduating college, if the students will work professionally, these current habits that they have in college could potentially carry over into the workforce based on our research. That is, depending on the severity and based on the circumstances. 100% of our participants use their cell phone to delay work, which creates a purposeful distraction. If this continues, this could be potentially detrimental because it impacts the ability to work, which could impact future work and professional adaptability.
While conducting our research, we ran into 3 limitations. The first were Zoom interviews. We gave all of our participants the option to conduct their research, conduct their interviews either in person or on Zoom, and all chose to be on Zoom, which made it much harder for us to see their nonverbal cues. Second, we required all of our participants to track their screen time, which meant that they had to have an iPhone, which limited our potential pool of participants. And finally, disclosure. We found that our participants were embarrassed to share specific details about their phone usage, such as how often they go on apps and what apps they specifically use. And finally, future research. If there were to be more research on this topic, we suggest doing a long-term study which will track the daily and weekly screen time and productivity of the participants to see how often they go on their phones and how often they are productive. We also suggest expanding the participants to test 23 to 28-year-olds to see the long-term impacts of phone attachment once they're working professionally. And finally, we use the uses and gratifications theory to ground our research, and we suggest that any future research investigates this theory further and sees what needs are specifically satisfied by phone usage.
Thank you for your time and attention.
My name is Aubrey-Grey Watson.
And I'm Eleanor Stuck.
And we're here and we're queer, and this is our research study on queer experiences in online video games.
This research focuses on the experiences of queer people in online games and how their experiences are shaped by interactions within the games and other players.
We did note several gaps in research on this particular subject. Historically, research on queer game studies focuses on single-player games with an emphasis on queer content and queer representation. By contrast, our own study seeks to expand the scope of queer game studies. We are covering queer expression and interactions with other players within online games.
This made us ask the research question, how does being queer impact interactions in online gaming environments?
Moving on to our methodology, all of our participants were older than 18 and defined as queer, which was they were not heterosexual, heteromantic, and or cisgender. Essentially, they could identify as one of those, but never all three. Of course, they also played online games. We recruited them through a variety of different methods, notably in-person, online, and snowball sampling, and we maintained the confidentiality of all of our participants by noting them in our study numerically.
We conducted a total of 8 interviews, both in person and over Zoom, with an average length of 35 minutes apiece, and after each interview, our data was transcribed using Otter.ai, a transcription service.
And of course, to analyze our data, we used a thematic analysis, and we developed our themes by noting those patterns in the participants' shared experiences, their expressed feelings during their interviews, and those repeated keywords that appeared during our interviews.
Our first theme that we discovered throughout our research was communication and expression. All participants noted their preferred forms of communication, their platforms, the degree of communication, as well as who they communicated with. Notably, all 8 participants communicated with Discord with fellow queer players. And outside of those groups, participants expressed their identities less and less. Participant 4 talked about their own gaming group, which was made up of queer individuals who came together by happenstance. This is important because participants were noted to have more positive experiences when playing with other queer players versus when they were not.
And of course, when they weren't playing with other queer players, there were noted themes of hostility and exclusivity. All participants mentioned some negative experience when playing online games, especially in first-person shooters and multiplayer online battle arena games. Additionally, the word slur was present across all 8 interviews, and with the participants noting the F slur and the casual use of queerphobic language, as well as commonly experiencing generally queer hostility towards queer identifying individuals. This language, as well as this behavior, created exclusionary environments surrounding these games and, as was noted by several participants, prompted them to avoid certain titles altogether. Participant 3 stating, "I just won't join certain games because I know how bad it is," relaying their experiences with the online game League of Legends and is talking about their experiences with its hostile community. And we found these responses to be particularly pertinent because they verified that queer experiences in online games are not just affected by the games themselves, but also player interactions within them.
Our third theme is queer content, and while all of our participants agreed that queer representation is minimal, most also stated that queer representation is growing within online games. And additionally, there was a unanimous feeling of appreciation for queer content by all participants, though not all participants valued queer content to the same degree. Participant 7 even mentioned how nice it was to see popular platforms incorporating queer identities and forms of expression throughout their games. While minimal, queer representation is noted to have a positive impact on player experiences as it creates a more inclusive environment.
And of course, ultimately, the findings of this research suggest that queer experiences in online games are largely shaped by the community surrounding them rather than the games themselves. Bonnie Ruberg emphasized effect over content as a means of expression in shaping gamers' experiences. And within online games, these findings suggest that queer experiences are shaped not just by interactions with the game, but are mostly affected by interactions with other players, for better or for worse. Adrian Shaw also found that LGBTQ+ gamers, notably those playing online games, often base their experiences off of finding like-minded gamers to play with, that was, their fellow queer players. Similarly, this research proposes that queer gamers are likely to form interpersonal groups that play together rather than engaging with larger queer-centric gaming communities. Noting participants' negative experiences, we can also assume that these behaviors are a product of poor interactions with non-queer players.
While player interactions were more impactful on queer gaming experiences than gaming content, there were elements of content that did affect player experiences. It is notable that those games with greater representation, inclusivity was more common, and consequently it can be suggested that increased inclusivity in online games will lead to more positive experiences for queer players.
Of course, with this research, we did encounter a number of limitations. Notably, we had a relatively small sample size, and were only able to conduct 8 interviews, which, of course, we would argue is not necessarily representative of all queer gamers. With that, within our small sample size, it was noted that a number of the participants were acquaintances or had communicated with each other at some point, meaning that their experiences were, in often cases, similar, if not completely identical. And of course, exacerbating all of this was our condensed time frame. Of course, within our research approval, we experienced a prolonged period that ultimately left us with less time to gather data.
We have several suggestions for future research. As 8 college students are not representative of the larger queer community as a whole, we do recommend an increased sample size. A redefinition of online games with focused studies may find more conclusive results per gaming genre, and studies may address interactions between players given multiplayer focus of online games. A separate study could be conducted on minimal representation.
All right, it has been a particularly queer year, y'all, but we pulled through nonetheless. Thank you all for watching. Thank you.
Thank you.
Heard it all, you've seen it all. 32 senior research presentations. We'd like to congratulate all of our seniors on a job very well done. As we said at the beginning of this day, conducting a research project is no easy task, and bringing it all the way through fruition is an immense task. So kudos to all of our seniors, and again, a job very well done.
We'd also like to thank our production team. Couldn't have done it without them. Dr. Ryan Stouffer, Dr. Awesome, Mr. Clint Wright, our chair of the Communication Studies Department, Professor Jeff Halliday, alum Christian Reefstack for coming back, Jamila Cromarty, Jess Sandler, Nicole Artavino, and of course, Domino's Pizza. We hope to see everybody here next year at this time. Thank you.